For more than 20 years, the quiet, close community of Gulgong, New South Wales, associated the name Michelle Bright with a tragic murder that was never solved. The killing of the 17-year-old student in 1999 caused deep and lasting sadness, leaving her family and the small town with overwhelming grief and no answers. The case was finally solved in 2023, when a man who had been living openly in the community for all those years was found guilty of her murder. This article tells the detailed story of the murder, the long investigation, and the risky undercover operation that ultimately revealed the truth. Michelle Bright was born on the 2nd of June, 1981, and lived with her parents and two older brothers in the town of Gulgong, which had a population of about 2,500. The town was a quiet, isolated place, far from large cities, where everyone knew one another. Michelle was an average teenager who loved animals. She played basketball, owned a horse, and had dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She was dedicated to her studies, hoping to earn high grades to get into vet school, and she also wanted to have a large family with 6 children someday. Michelle went to a friend's birthday party on the 26th of February, 1999. Her mother took her to the party, and Michelle told her she would see her the next day before getting out of the car. She planned to spend the night at a different friend's house because her own home was far away. The following morning, Michelle's mother woke up to find that she was not home. Initially, her mother thought Michelle was just sleeping late. But as time went on, she became more worried. Since Michelle didn't have a cell phone, her mother began calling her friends. She found out that Michelle had left the party at about 12:30 a.m. with a couple who offered to drive her to the town center, which was a short walk from where she was supposed to be staying. Michelle's mother was surprised to learn that she had never arrived at her friend's house. Worried, Michelle's mother went to the local police, but they ignored her fears, believing Michelle had run away or was with friends. The police refused to begin a search. With no help from the police, Michelle's family started their own search, talking to people and looking around town, but they found no trace of her. The terrible discovery was made 3 days later on the 2nd of March, when a man and his dog found Michelle's body in tall grass by an old railway track about half a mile from her house. The thick grass made it almost impossible to see the body from far away. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle was strangled and had multiple bruises on her body. Part of her clothing was missing, and her bra had been torn off. Michelle's bag was discovered close by, but there were no other clues at the crime scene. While a few strands of hair were found in her hand, investigators were unable to get a DNA sample from them. Police then treated the case as a murder and started a full investigation, questioning everyone who was at the party. Experts believed Michelle was probably killed on the same night she went missing. The couple who gave her a ride said they dropped her off on the main street, and no one reported hearing any screams or a fight. Because no one heard anything, investigators thought Michelle likely knew her attacker and may have willingly gotten into a car with them, a belief her family agreed with, as they said she would never get into a car with a stranger. They also thought the killer was probably a local person since there were very few outsiders in Gulgong. Over the next several months, police created a list of 14 suspects but couldn't link any of them to the crime. Michelle's ex-boyfriend was one of the first suspects because he was upset about their breakup, but there was no evidence against him. Another local resident was considered a suspect because he seemed too upset about Michelle's death, even though they didn't know each other well. All the suspects gave DNA samples willingly, except for one man, Mark, who was 23 years old. Mark had been in the same class as Michelle's older brother and was known for stalking women. A wiretap on his home showed that his wife had suspicions about his honesty, but Mark's DNA eventually proved not to be a match to the evidence. Police couldn't arrest the killer because they didn't have his DNA or any other strong evidence. Strangely, a few days after her body was found, a relative of Michelle's visited the site and saw one of her earrings on the ground, which was odd since police had already searched the area. This made it seem like either the police missed it during their search, or the killer had taken it and later returned it. About a year after the murder, Michelle's family, believing the killer was a local, moved to another city because it was too difficult to live among people they were suspicious of. 6 years after her death, her parents divorced, and her father and brothers continued to blame themselves. The case went unsolved, and in 2000, a $100,000 reward was offered for information, which was increased to $500,000 in 2009. The case was reopened multiple times, with police following new leads and re-examining evidence, even going to the UK to analyze her belongings for foreign DNA, but no progress was made. The case took a decisive turn in 2019, 20 years after the murder, when the unsolved homicide team reviewed it again. Since there was no DNA evidence, detectives focused on the list of 5 suspects and narrowed it down to 2. The main suspect was Craig Henry Rumsby, a 6-year-old man who had lived only 2 doors down from Michelle when she was killed. Rumsby had an extensive criminal record, with several arrests for harassment and indecent exposure. Most importantly, he had been a suspect in a similar assault case involving a woman in Gulgong just a year before Michelle's murder. In that case, Rumsby attacked and tried to assault a woman on her porch, but she chose not to press charges. Another suspicious fact was that Rumsby had moved to Sydney only 2 weeks after Michelle was killed. The police, knowing a confession was needed, began a risky undercover operation. They created a fake criminal organization and spent nearly a year earning Rumsby's trust. The detectives pretended to be part of a fake gang, telling Rumsby they needed a new member they could trust entirely. They performed a series of staged crimes to make him trust them. As the operation continued, the undercover officers started putting pressure on him, suggesting police were getting closer to solving an old murder and that his past was a threat to their gang. In one conversation, Rumsby mentioned, "I hope they won't question me about the murder of Michelle Bright," and said she was like a sister to him. The operation ended with a dramatic Mr. Big sting. Police held a press conference to announce a record $1 million reward for information about the murder, a tactic intended to increase Rumsby's anxiety. On that day, Rumsby made a strange comment on the police's social media post about the reward, writing that it was so sad the killer hadn't been caught, and that Michelle was like a sister to me. The next day, Rumsby was taken to a meeting with the gang leader who confronted him with police files on Michelle's case, including a photo of his old car. The car had been found burned the day after police first spoke to him about the investigation, and the boss suggested this was a sign that police were getting closer. Rumsby started confessing under the pressure. He admitted that he killed Michelle, but said he was too drunk to recall the details. He was then brought to the crime scene, where he shared disturbing details that only the killer would have known. He described dragging Michelle off the road and said the clasp on her bra was broken. He also confessed to the attempted assault on the other woman a year earlier, giving details that matched her story. Once he had confessed, the undercover officers took Rumsby to the airport, where he was arrested by police. In 2023, over 24 years after Michelle's death, Craig Rumsby was tried for her murder and the 1998 assault. His defense team claimed the confession was forced and therefore couldn't be trusted. The prosecution, however, showed Rumsby's detailed confession and the specific, unreleased information he provided as strong evidence. The victim of the 1998 assault testified as well, identifying Rumsby in court and finally feeling that justice had been served for her. The prosecution believed that Rumsby had seen Michelle and either offered her a ride or walked her home, then attacked her once they were out of town. The jury delivered a guilty verdict on both charges on the 30th of June, 2023. This emotional conclusion gave Michelle's mother a deep sense of peace after decades of unspeakable pain. Rumsby was sentenced to 32 years in prison in August 2023, with a non-parole period of 24 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2044 when he is at least 77 years old. The judge called the attack on Michelle horrific and terrifying, and said that Rumsby had brutally and carelessly ended her young life. For Michelle's family, who had given up on ever finding justice, the verdict provided a painful but important end to a case that had troubled Gulgong for a generation. The disappearance of Morgan Nick nearly 3 decades ago continues to cast a long shadow, a poignant symbol of enduring mystery that reshaped a family's life and profoundly impacted an entire community. This heartbreaking cold case from Alma, Arkansas, spotlights the extraordinary resilience of a mother, Colleen Nick, whose personal anguish evolved into a national crusade. Her daughter's name is now synonymous with the tireless effort to find missing children across America. Born on the 12th of September, 1988, in the serene town of Ozark, Arkansas, Morgan was the eldest of 3 children. Her parents soon welcomed a son, followed a year later by another daughter, forming a close and active sibling trio. Morgan cherished her relationship with her younger brother and sister, often spending hours immersed in imaginative play. Her brother, in particular, looked up to her. Even as Morgan was just learning to read, she'd patiently practice with children's books, frequently reading bedtime stories to him. From a very young age, her deep affection for animals was evident, and she often declared her dream of becoming a veterinarian. In elementary school, Morgan actively participated in the Girl Scouts, finding immense joy in crafting, embarking on nature trips, and simply enjoying time with her friends. When Morgan was 6, her parents divorced, yet they consciously ensured the children maintained a strong and consistent connection with their father through regular visits. In the early summer of 1995, Colleen received an invitation from a family friend to attend a Little League baseball game in Alma, a town about 30 miles away. Colleen initially hesitated, noting it was a Friday evening and the distance was considerable. Despite her reservations, she ultimately decided to go, taking Morgan along, hoping it would be a pleasant way for them to spend time together. On the evening of the 9th of June, Colleen left her 2 younger children with their grandmother and drove to the stadium. Though a modest venue, about 300 people had gathered, a typical crowd of parents and children, Colleen located her friends and they settled in to watch the game. Morgan, however, soon grew restless. She spotted 2 children she knew and was invited to join them near the stadium to catch fireflies. Colleen felt a wave of apprehension. Dusk was settling, and they were unfamiliar with Alma. She worried, a premonition of potential danger flickering through her mind. Her friends, sensing her concern, quickly reassured her, explaining their own children played safely near the stadium often. With some reluctance, Colleen agreed, and Morgan eagerly darted off with the other children. They paused briefly on a small hill, remaining within Colleen's line of sight, and Colleen maintained a vigilant watch, checking on Morgan periodically. Approximately 15 minutes later, as the baseball game concluded and players began to make their way toward the bleachers to reunite with their families, Colleen momentarily looked away. When she glanced back just seconds later, her daughter was gone. Morgan's 2 playmates were already walking towards the bleachers, but Morgan was conspicuously absent. A cold, consuming panic gripped Colleen as she rushed to the children, her voice laced with urgency, asking if they had seen her daughter. They explained that before heading back, they had paused by a car in the parking lot to shake sand from their shoes, with Morgan standing just behind the vehicle while they were in front. Once finished, they walked back, assuming Morgan had simply remained near the car to wait for her mom, and thus hadn't thought much of it. Frantically, Colleen's gaze swept the parking lot. She spotted her car, but there was no sign of Morgan. Rushing over, she frantically checked inside the vehicle, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. Overwhelmed, she returned to the children, desperate for any insight. They had no idea where Morgan could have gone, though they did recall seeing a man in the parking lot while they were playing. He stood near a red pickup truck, observing the stadium and occasionally glancing their way. At one point, he even approached them and spoke, though they couldn't recall his exact words, only that he had a distinct country accent. Suspecting this man's connection to her daughter's disappearance, Morgan's mother immediately contacted the police. Within a mere 6 minutes, officers arrived at the stadium, prioritizing interviews with the children who had last seen Morgan. Through their detailed accounts, police compiled a more precise description of the man, a white male, estimated between 23 and 30 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, with an average build, a beard, a mustache, and dark hair. His attire was casual, only jeans and no shirt. His vehicle was also vividly recalled, an old red pickup truck with Arkansas license plates and a white camper shell on the back. This particular detail immediately raised officers' suspicions, as a camper shell could easily conceal an individual. An added peculiarity was the camper's unusual brevity for the truck model, giving it an odd, disproportionate appearance, suggesting the man might have intended to use it for an abduction. Officers quickly searched the parking lot, but no matching vehicle was found. They then began questioning all 300 attendees still present. However, most had been engrossed in the game and recalled nothing unusual. A search around the stadium perimeter also yielded no results, prompting officers to expand their efforts to nearby streets. Despite their swift actions, no trace of Morgan was found that night. Colleen was utterly distraught, unable to face returning home, and spent the remainder of the night in agonizing vigil at the local fire station. The following day, the search efforts dramatically intensified. News of Morgan's disappearance spread rapidly, prompting dozens of concerned volunteers to join the search. Soon, the substantial resources of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Arkansas State Police were deployed, including helicopters for aerial reconnaissance. A composite suspect sketch, based on Morgan's friends' descriptions, was created and widely distributed across Alma and surrounding communities, appealing for anyone who might recognize the man. Initially, authorities also considered that Morgan might have simply wandered away and become lost. However, as nearly 24 agonizing hours passed without any sign of her, it became painfully clear that if that were the case, she would have been located. That evening, police began receiving alarming reports from other parents. One woman recounted that just hours before the baseball game, a stranger driving a red pickup truck had attempted to lure her 4-year-old daughter into his vehicle near a laundromat in Alma. Her description of the suspect chillingly matched the composite sketch of Morgan's possible abductor. The day after Morgan's disappearance, another report emerged from a witness in Fort Smith, a nearby town. He described seeing a man trying to lure a 9-year-old girl into a public restroom, but the girl managed to escape. Once again, the man's description closely matched the composite sketch. These incidents strongly suggested that the individual behind Morgan's disappearance might have a history of attempted abductions or even successfully committed similar crimes. Police immediately sharpened their focus on locating any red pickup truck matching witness descriptions and began reviewing the backgrounds of known offenders in nearby towns. Over the subsequent weeks, investigators received hundreds of tips about potential suspects. Yet, despite tireless work, they couldn't establish a concrete connection or confirm involvement for most individuals. Meanwhile, investigators meticulously combed the area around the stadium, collecting various items that could potentially serve as evidence, including cigarette butts and bottles. These were sent for DNA analysis, but no clear indication emerged connecting any of them to Morgan's disappearance. As for the elusive red pickup truck, police received nearly 250 calls from witnesses across various towns and even neighboring states, all reporting sightings of similar vehicles. The sheer prevalence of such models, literally thousands, proved to be a significant hurdle. Investigators attempted to check each owner, but again, no evidence emerged linking any of them to Morgan's vanishing. The pattern of painstaking investigation, yielding no definitive answers, persisted for 2 weeks, until police received a surprising and seemingly promising call. A resident of Stuttgart, a town approximately 3 hours from Alma, observed a man attempting to break into his car on his property. The homeowner startled him, and the intruder immediately fled. As the man ran, the witness claimed to see him holding a small girl by the hand. Police showed him the composite sketch of the suspect, and he confirmed that the person attempting to enter his car looked very similar, and the girl resembled Morgan. Investigators quickly launched a large-scale operation in Stuttgart, securing an area of about 10 square miles and deploying several dozen officers. Morgan's parents immediately traveled to the town, their hearts seizing with a fragile, desperate hope that their daughter would finally be found. Hundreds of volunteers, alongside the police, began methodically searching the entire town and surrounding areas. Helicopters scanned from above, and search dogs, using Morgan's belongings to acquire her scent, tirelessly worked the ground. The search continued for a grueling 16 hours, but tragically, no trace of the missing girl was found. Eventually, the police began to harbor serious doubts about the witness's story. They conducted 2 polygraph tests, both strongly suggesting deception. Although the man initially insisted on his truthfulness, he ultimately admitted to fabricating the entire account. He had indeed seen someone attempting to break into his car, but he hadn't gotten a good look at the person's face, and there was no little girl with him. The man was arrested for providing false information, an act that consumed nearly a full day of search efforts and thousands of dollars in resources. While it's unclear if he faced significant punishment, such actions typically result in a serious fine or a jail sentence. Investigators found themselves back at square one, the brief flicker of hope extinguished, leaving a profound sense of frustration. Despite these profound setbacks, giving up was never an option. The investigative team was bolstered by 17 more officers from across the state, and they refocused on meticulously sorting through the relentless influx of leads. By then, they had accumulated over 1,500 tips, yet none brought detectives any closer to finding Morgan. Her parents, though disheartened by the lack of progress, remained steadfast. As the months bled into years, their hopes for a swift resolution began to fade. Approximately a year after Morgan disappeared, Colleen Nick discovered a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding missing children. While still intensely focused on her own daughter's case, the absence of new, actionable clues meant there were no immediate trails left to follow. It was then that Colleen began channeling her immense grief and determination into helping other families enduring similar tragedies, pouring her energy into raising awareness about the ever-present dangers that could strike at any moment in a child's life. Over the next several years, police continued to follow up on various leads and question potential suspects, but tangible progress remained elusive. In 2001, 6 years after Morgan's disappearance, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released an age-progressed image showing what she might look like. That same year, several prominent television shows aired segments about her case, leading to a significant increase in tips. Although most of these tips proved to be dead ends, one, in particular, captured investigators' attention. The caller claimed that a girl's body was buried on a specific property in Boonville, a small town about an hour from Alma. Police took this tip very seriously because the person provided specific details about the case that had never been made public. In early 2002, armed with a search warrant, they brought in search dogs and meticulously dug up the entire area. However, no trace of Morgan was found. The case then remained agonizingly cold for nearly a decade. In 2010, police received another tip about a possible location in a different state where Morgan's abductor might have held her. They conducted a thorough search, but once again, there was no evidence to suggest that the girl had ever been there. Interestingly, in 2017, police returned to search the same house, but this time for a different investigation. It turned out that a man who had once lived there was serving time in prison for crimes against minors, and authorities suspected him in another similar case. Even then, however, the search yielded no new clues directly related to Morgan. In 2019, a new documentary about the case was released, and for the first time since Morgan's disappearance, police publicly shared a photograph of the red pickup truck believed to be connected to the abductor. The vehicle had been briefly captured on someone's camera during the game, but the poor quality and awkward angle made it nearly impossible to discern any crucial details. Following the documentary's release, police appealed to the public for any information about who might have owned the truck. While a series of new tips came in, despite these renewed efforts, they still couldn't make definitive progress in solving the case. This prolonged period of stagnation persisted until 2021, when investigators finally named their primary suspect, Billy Jack Lynx. Lynx had initially come to police attention shortly after Morgan's disappearance. He possessed a criminal record involving offenses against minors and, crucially, owned a red pickup truck similar to the one described by witnesses. However, back in 1995, despite searching his truck during his questioning, police could not definitively establish any connection between him and Morgan's disappearance. They had believed Billy was being truthful about his innocence at the time, and his age as significantly older than 30 contradicted the younger age range provided by Morgan's friends. Now, nearly 3 decades later, detectives revisited Lynx as a suspect, spurred by the hope that advanced DNA analysis tools could uncover any latent traces of Morgan's presence in his vehicle. This renewed focus came with complications. Billy Jack Lynx had died in 2000 while serving time for an attempted abduction that occurred just 2 months after Morgan's disappearance. In that incident, he had attempted to lure another young girl into his car while she was standing outside a store. Her alert mother scared him off and reported the incident to the police, leading to his arrest. At the time of this arrest, Lynx was 70 years old, and he died of natural causes 5 years later while still incarcerated. Another major obstacle was the whereabouts of Billy's pickup truck. After nearly 30 years, investigators had no idea if it even still existed. Undeterred, the investigators embarked on the painstaking task of tracing the pickup truck's chain of ownership since Billy's arrest. After an extensive effort, they successfully located the truck. It was still operational, and its current owner willingly granted police permission to examine it. Initially, detectives tempered their hopes, acknowledging that any DNA evidence could easily have been erased or degraded over such a long period. But against the odds, forensic experts discovered a few hairs in the truck bed that appeared consistent with Morgan's braces. These vital samples were immediately sent to a specialized Texas lab equipped with the very latest DNA analysis technology for closer examination. It took 8 months of meticulous work, but finally, a monumental breakthrough occurred. The lab successfully extracted a DNA sample from the hair and compared it to Morgan's mother's DNA. The results were conclusive. They indicated a close genetic match in the first degree of relation. This meant the hair almost certainly belonged to one of Colleen's children or siblings. Colleen Nick adamantly stated she had never heard of Billy Lynx and had never met him. Given that no other immediate family member of Morgan's could have been in that specific truck, the forensic evidence strongly implicated that the hair belonged to Morgan Nick herself. On the 1st of October, 2024, police held a press conference to formally announce that Billy Jack Lynx was now definitively considered responsible for Morgan's abduction, expressing no doubt about his involvement. Sadly, almost 29 years after her disappearance, no one connected to the case believes Morgan could still be alive. Investigators suspect that Billy killed her within the first few days after the abduction, but her final resting place remains unknown. Even though the case is now essentially solved in terms of identifying the abductor, the police have declared their unwavering commitment to continue the search for her remains. However, without a confession from Lynx, who is deceased, this critical task remains profoundly challenging. Detectives are also now reviewing Billy Lynx's past for his possible involvement in other unsolved cases, considering his history of attempted abductions. Police suspect that he could have a much longer and more extensive history of such offenses. At the time of Morgan's abduction, he was already 70 years old, and his service in the military during World War II might have provided him with certain skills potentially relevant to his crimes. Morgan's disappearance left an indelible mark on Arkansas. In a poignant tribute, authorities even decided to rename the state's Amber Alert system to the Morgan Alert, serving as a constant, urgent reminder to the public and a symbol of all missing children. As for her mother, Colleen Nick, she continues to tirelessly aid other children and families through her nonprofit organization, the Morgan Nick Foundation. This profound work has become her primary means of coping with the immeasurable loss of her daughter. Though deep within, she still clings to a small, persistent flicker of hope that Morgan might, against all odds, somehow still be alive. The path to complete closure is still being forged, but these recent scientific advancements offer the most tangible hope yet that Morgan's story will one day reach its full, albeit painful, conclusion. This case stands as a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of profound loss, highlighting how relentless dedication and the relentless march of scientific progress can, even after decades, bring forth crucial answers, offering a measure of clarity and perhaps, eventually, peace.